we're at a pivot point where the boardroom community, the CEO, the C-suite are going to be more held accountable for applying effective oversight to cybersecurity risk, no different than any other risk domain that the organization may face.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO Compass: Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as other top CISOs and industry security leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Christopher Hetner, Senior Cyber Advisor to the National Association of Corporate Directors, or the NACD.
Back in the late teens, I was always interested in tinkering with computers and breaking things, fixing them to get, putting them back together. Big consumer electronics, types of assembly, and when I was looking for my undergraduate degree program, I decided to pursue a career in law enforcement, following the footsteps of my father. And he served in the Marine Corps. Once a Marine, always a Marine, exemplified that. And I pursued my undergraduate degree at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in the great city University of New York. And I switched majors because I started to focus in on computer science and the integration of criminal behavior to computers and use of technology to execute their crime. And I remember this was early days, back in 1992, 93. I had this nutty professor. He vividly remember his office lined with books on computer sciences and computer security. So, of course, the bad guys are going to go from robbing banks with guns to executing complex code over computer networks. And I beyond intrigued, in fact, that I extended my undergrad degree, all my research, by another year and a half, because I switched majors and decided to really focus in on this concept of computer security. And that was kind of like, my launch pad into financial services, banking, mostly Wall Street, New York-based organizations where I supported them from a security operations, building data center facilities, security operations centers, firewall management, intrusion detection management, early days, mid-90s, late 90s, 2001, 2, and then pivoted from the data center, if I may, into the trading floors of the financial institutions in Wall Street. So I worked at Citigroup for 5 years, supported their investment bank, capital markets business, ran global cybersecurity programs there, chief information security officer at GE Capital. So I headed north from Manhattan up to Connecticut and became their global CISO. And kind of the story goes from there. But been at it since the early days.
Interesting. I mean, what a great combination of the criminal justice background, the law enforcement, cybersecurity, computer science, and the finance side. I mean, that really does bring it all together. So tell us. So we have this rule, the SEC proposed rule that's out there for cyber risk governance. Walk us through that. What should people know about this rule?
Yeah, so I served as senior advisor to the chair of the SEC for 4 years, and in 2017 we started to think about how to provide transparency around cyber risk through the investor lens, but without giving the roadmap in terms of how adversaries would compromise your systems and your assets. And our thinking was, as this becomes more and more of a economic, business, financial matter where companies are losing, billions of dollars in either intellectual property, they're seeing business interruption event causing disruption in their operations ability to produce products. We thought about this through the lens of how do we make this more of a top-down issue. And so what we did was in 2018, we took the existing guidance and we made it more of a hard, fast interpretive guidance. But the premise was, let's provide the investor community with transparency around how companies are governing this exposure, this heightened risk exposure called cyber, how it implicates the balance sheet of the organization, what's the impact to its operations, its business exposure, and its financial condition. And to the extent that you have a breach or you have unaddressed cyber risk, what are you doing about it? How are you treating it? How are you ensuring that no different than any other risk domain, whether it's an investment that's gone sour or whether you have a hurricane that's taken out a facility that produces widgets and suddenly that facility's out of production and therefore it causes a decrease in delay in your ability to produce widgets. Same, type of causality can be introduced as a result of a cyber attack. So that's really the premise behind, how we were thinking about cyber in the rule. And now we're at a pivot point where the boardroom community, the CEO, the C-suite are going to be more held accountable for applying effective oversight to cybersecurity risk. No different than any other risk domain that the organization may face. So within the rule, it's a few things that are salient. Number one, determination of materiality of a cyber risk and or an incident, that the compass as to how to determine materiality is premised on its impact to the business, operational, and financial condition of the organization. It's the ability to contextualize cyber risk to how you operate your business. How do you differentiate from a product perspective? It contemplates within the rule risk exposures such as delay in product launches, counterparty exposure, increase in insurance premiums, loss of intellectual property, loss of customer data, depreciation of stock price, regulatory class action, which recent studies have are pointed to the legal class action type of exposures are more of a tail risk. So they're not going to be realized until essentially 12, 18, 24 months out post breach. So all that needs to be factored into this complex risk area as it pertains to how it could negatively impact the fabric of the organization. And that's really the centerpiece of the rule. So how
is materiality, decided then? Is there guidance that's being provided so that there's organizations are interpreting what's material for a cyber risk between different organizations in a consistent manner?
Yeah, so contained within the SEC rule is how a listed company is required to report an incident or deem a risk to be material. And the materiality determination is influenced by a few factors as it pertains to the impact to the business, its operations, and its financial conditions. And as I stated before, the types of costs and adverse consequences are listed as examples within the rule, such as costs due to business interruption, decrease in production, delays in product launches, payments due to ransom, other extortion demands, intellectual property theft, the remediation cost associated with stolen assets or information, the repairs to systems, the incentive to retain customers and business partners, damage to the company's competitiveness, including the stock price, long-term shareholder value. So these are fairly tangible outcomes. The challenge we have is we're expecting too much on the cybersecurity organization, the CISO organization, to derive at these factors. And obviously, we're not equipped to do that. So we're bubbling this up to enterprise risk and to the board to help calibrate where these direct and indirect financial costs can negatively impact the company. And I've been doing a ton of work with the insurance markets, the cyber insurance industry, over the last, 6 years, even during my time at the SEC. And we looked at within the commission how the companies factor in these losses, who's got, kind of this process calibrated. And we looked at areas such as, the rating agencies. We looked at typical cybersecurity companies like companies that do scoring, network telemetry analysis, hygiene analysis. And we also looked at the insurance markets, and we've concluded through our studying and our analysis is that the risk transfer markets ultimately serve as the arbiter for cyber risk, no different than how the risk transfer markets inform automobile safety measures such as seat belts, crash avoidance systems, sensors in the automobile, how we think about how planes are flying in terms of protecting the passengers from a safety perspective, having all these measurements from predictive losses. So that's where we see the more advanced enterprise look to establishing where these calculated losses are going to materialize based on the company's business profile, the industry they operate in, the types of losses that have been inflicted historically, and the types of what we call threats that can introduce that material exposure. And then more importantly, and this is where we within the NACD community, the National Association of Corporate Directors, where we've got 24,000 members, board members, we're operating at top down. Our juxtaposition to cyber risk quantification, CRQ, which is a bottom-up analysis born through the technology organization or the cyber organization, we see that as summarily rejected by the risk transfer markets. Instead, it's more about stressing the balance sheet, understanding the business implications, and deriving at these losses from the actuaries, from the risk management teams, from the legal community, the compliance community, the business leaders, not from the cybersecurity community that is not versed in this type of risk dimensioning. We're just not. So that's where we have a source of truth, if I may, with these types of advanced analytics being used to underwrite global cyber insurance policies.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. So how does the board show that they have the right level of oversight? And there's that discussion, too, about having cybersecurity expertise on the board. Where do you see that going and what those requirements are?
Yeah, so we have a few areas that we see as leading practice within, we'll call it the NACD boardroom community. So number one, there's an expectation in the new proposed rule how you exercise your oversight in the boardroom as it pertains to cybersecurity risk governance. And it's more about having an individual on the board that is, quote unquote, the cyber expert. It's about the substance of the reporting into the board. Are you contextualizing cyber to business, operational, financial exposure analysis? Are you advancing an expression as to how those risks can manifest? And more importantly, what threats are likely to introduce that material harm And then what do you do about it? Do you have the right capital? Do you have the right investments, the right people? Or are you over-reliant on certain suppliers? Do you have concentration risk? And it's really designed to provide the boardroom with a compass to determine where these projected losses are going to be realized, how much is it going to cost the company, and what do we do about it? Do we buy it down? Do we transfer some of the risk? Do we accept a percentage of this risk? What's its risk relative to our top line revenue? Some of our analysis suggests over the last few years through our insurance analysis, on average, the overall cost associated with a cyber event on average represents about 2% of top line revenue for the company. And so 2%, you can call that material, call it maybe not material, depends, but that's an area that where there's an expectation. The other expectation from the rule is to what extent do you have cyber expertise in the boardroom? And do you have that individual that's the quote unquote cyber expert? Are you augmenting that using outside expertise independent of management that's hired directly by the board? No different than how the board has sought outside independent auditors to independently evaluate the financial condition of the organization. We're seeing that same type of movement with cybersecurity. So there's a few ways to achieve, how you embed or focus and concentrate on cyber risk oversight in the board. Our position within the NACD is, while it's nice to have a quote unquote cyber or technology expert on the board, the reality is that there's 3.5 million vacancies globally in cyber. And to be a board member, it's not strictly about technology risk. It's about a broad range of risks, ranging from preserving revenue, capitalization, how effective your balance sheet is operating in certain economic conditions. Where do you source your capital from? Where do you have potential human capital issues? Wide range to be a board member. And I sit on a board for a private equity firm where I've got to evaluate investment strategy, deployment of capital, gain access to efficient capital. So it's very much a broad-reaching, wide range type of net to be an effective board member. So our position is, instead of putting the individual that is the quote-unquote cyber expert, aka a one-trick pony, which, by the way, the CISO and that individual becomes a narrow conversation focused on cyber, and the consequence is negative because now the entirety of the board totally checks out, and we're not contextualizing that cyber risk dialogue to business, operational, financial outcome, where the entirety of the board can rally against this and support it. So it's a very nuanced piece of language in the proposed rule that we've got to delicately balance in terms of achieving that level of expertise in the board, exercising fiduciary, engaging the entirety of the board on this risks topic, and also achieving some level of capability in terms of.
So are you saying that we should be educating the entire board so that they have some familiarity with the cybersecurity versus having one person on the board?
There's a degree of education, but we've realized within the NACD community, we've seen a education and training only goes to a certain extent. So we actually offer for the NACD a cyber risk reporting capability that delivers, based on the same analytics used across the cyber insurance industry, an organization's over financial exposure analysis introduced by cyber risks and cyber attacks, and a view of how those threats are most likely to introduce business, operational, financial losses. And then on top of that, here are insights into the types of controls or defenses, investments you should make to effectively mitigate that loss. Mm-hmm. And so that's a capability that has been well adopted by the boardroom community. We're committed to making this the standard on cyber risk reporting in the board. And we've had a significant amount of positive feedback saying, wow, now I can understand this problem. Now I can support the CISO, because if I have a ransomware event that's going to cause a 48-hour outage on this segment of the network, and it's going to cost us $100 million in lost production, and the CISO is asking me, hey, I need $1 million to ensure that we have sufficient backup copies parked away, perhaps using immutable copies of data, aka snapshot technology. I think the companies like Panzora that provide that. If I spend $1 million, I can reduce $100 million in exposure.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation now I can rally against and provide effective oversight and support.
Yeah. And I think we've been really good up till this point around controls, but to really be effective, we have to be, in the boardroom on that business side. Now, in terms of the incident reporting, what's the time frame around that, and also how do you see this playing with the other laws that we have out there and the other regulations, and are we adding more regulation on top of the existing regulation that's going to be turned into a compliance effort, versus adding some teeth into our process?
I think we're seeing this is a couple things. The SEC clearly has a mandate across publicly just listed companies in its oversight. And really the goal there is to provide effective transparency, oversight, and equipping the investor community with an understanding as to how publicly listed companies are addressing this existential threat. And quite frankly, if I'm an investor, how you developing the right capability, or you making the right investments to ensure that my investment into your company is safe and sound. So that's really the purpose behind that regulation. But as a result, obviously, it builds in resilience. It's a lever to make sure that particularly the middle market companies are spending wisely into this space. But we also have other regulations coming out of the Federal Trade Commission. We have an abundance of regulations across the banking community, the financial services sector, the energy sector, telecommunications. Department of Homeland Security, CISA, is initiating a reporting requirement for critical infrastructure entities. So I know there's an effort within at least the U.S. framework to kind of rationalize and balance these requirements so that, for instance, like the last thing we need is CISA mandating a reporting requirement for an incident on a critical infrastructure entity that also happens to be publicly listed by the SEC, right? And so we've got to deconflict those two requirements to make sure that they're normalized. And so I know there is an effort underway to rationalize those requirements.
Yeah, good. What is the reporting time frame for the incidents?
The SEC rule is 4 days once you determine it's material. And materiality, as you know, could take a few days, it could take months. But there's that's a 4-day determination. It's a 4-day reporting requirement once it's termed as material.
Excellent. Well, this has been excellent, Chris. I know, the more we can get guidance and get companies moving in the right direction, the better that is for the entire supply chain. So what sort of final advice would you give to emerging CISOs, new CISOs, current CISOs, experienced CISOs, as they're looking at the SEC regulations that will be coming out and how to navigate that space?
I would say start looking at resources such as the National Association of Corporate Directors. Understand what's being socialized in terms of those requirements across the boardroom community. Work very closely with your enterprise risk management team, including your general counsel, your CFO, your risk organization, lines of business, Cybersecurity is a team sport. It requires the whole of the company to rally against this matter. And that's an area that I would suggest emerging CISOs wrap their heads around and start building those relationships so that, when you're having the conversation with the board and, you're producing metrics for better risk decisioning and oversight, that they're not myopically focused on the technical exposure, but it's a view as to the relationship between how these exposures can introduce business, operational, financial stress to the organization, and that you have buy-in and input into that calculus from the enterprise risk management community.
Well, that's great advice, Chris. And, thanks for the time and thanks for, all that you're doing to help get the visibility for cybersecurity and show the impact to our businesses.
It's a pleasure, and we'll keep you apprised as we start to advance these new requirements.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Visit more CISO Stories podcasts on securityweekly.com, where you will find an index to prior episodes. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com.